people use in Gaza for phone calls and text messages go through Israel. All of the aid goes through Israel. All the food, all the energy goes through Israel. I mean, there's a freaking book in the Bible about how hard it is to get to this place, and Israel controls all access.
Right.
This should not have happened from a national preparedness point of view.
And well,
I disagree with that because if you're not going to have feet on the ground, you're going to be doing a lot more with signals intelligence, and we can have a discussion as to whether that was appropriate. But they also had a lot of human intelligence penetration throughout. People forget that while Israel is the Zionist entity and a Jewish state, it also is a multi-ethnic country which has a substantial minority of Arabs who are committed to the state. So it is not particularly difficult for the Israeli intelligence to recruit Arabs
mm,
to penetrate these organizations. The problem was much more basic. Are you familiar with what's been going on here in the United States with folks on the MAGA crowd, especially folks like Matt Gaetz and Donald Trump, basically lambasting U.S. military and intelligence forces for being insufficiently loyal? That
yeah.
started in Israel 10 years ago. And so basically, it's gotten to the point where the Israeli right considers the Israeli military a political entity and just ignored it. And so we have seen warnings about this coming up as long as 16 months ago that were just ignored at the top. So there's a cautionary tale here for us as well when people claim they represent the military but have never served, have no idea how it works, thinks it's politicized, refuse to talk to them. It leads somewhere. Right. Now, there are always going to be folks in the national security establishment who all they do every day is dream up threats, and they're going to say, I predicted this. I mean, that's like people in our national security system back in October 2001 said they predicted 9/11 because they issued a memo 3 years previous that, someone might take over a plane and fly it into a building. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about ever more credible assertions of the very specifics that Hamas was preparing for, right down to the towns that were affected. They had operational intelligence on this not weeks before, months of reality. The belief was that Hamas was too entrenched as a political player and wouldn't risk its own position to start a general war. And the tactics that were in use hadn't been used before, and they were dismissed as something that Hamas has never had an interest in. Didn't matter that Hamas was saying stuff like this out loud. So all the warnings were there. But just as the United States politicized the use of masks during a respiratory outbreak, unfortunately, in Israel, intelligence on Hamas became politicized. Exactly. There were kind of two phases to Hamas's plan. Phase one went off more or less without a hitch. Phase two would be if the Israelis failed to respond in time to basically go further into the country and go after critical infrastructure excuse me, additional population centers and so on. Luckily, the Israelis, especially the reservists, people who weren't even active military, rallied within hours and managed to prevent that second phase from happening. But Hamas had a very similar plot to Al Qaeda. You commit an atrocity, you provoke a response. That response forces the other side to inflict massive civilian damage. And then people rally around you as a result, and you overthrow the system that you're opposing. Now, in the case of Al Qaeda, didn't work. I mean, yes, the US moved in, we blundered sideways into the Middle East. We were there for 20 years, but not one country overthrew their secular government as Al Qaeda had predicted. And the same thing now is happening with the Palestinians, that no one is coming to help them at all. The leader of Hezbollah, a guy by the name of Nasrallah, he gave this fiery speech a couple weeks back about how this is horrible. And of course, Hezbollah will fight to the last drop of blood, fight to the very bitter end against Israel to support the Palestinians. And by fight to the end, I mean by the end of this speech. And that was it. And Iran was even more direct. They're like, as long as Israel doesn't attack us, we're just going to let this one ride. We think it's great what's going on, but we're not getting involved. No one likes Hamas, and very, very few people with means in the Middle East think very highly of the Palestinians at all. So Gaza, unfortunately, from a humanitarian point of view, is completely on its own, and Hamas, from a strategic point of view, thankfully, is absolutely on its own. There's two layers of it. One of it is more or less what you're talking about. Hamas won Gaza Strip elections back in the mid-2000s, then never had elections again. So there is no political opposition, loyal or otherwise. It's just Hamas. And so they are the representatives of the government. All the aid that comes in, which, let's be honest here, is the lifeblood of Gaza. There's no economy here. There's no agriculture. There's no energy. It's all 100% donations from the UN that is administered either by the UN or by Israel. And it has to come in after Israel inspects everything. So there's no other venue here. So that is piece one. Piece two is the militant wing, and there is not one militant wing. This isn't like the Roman Catholic Church where one dude's in charge. There's a lot of factions, and clearly some of the more powerful factions work together on this. Now, Israel is of the opinion, and it's kind of hard to argue with them on this one, that regardless of whether there's a split between the militant wings and the political wing allowed the militant wings to do this. And part of the
they control the
territory and the civilian security apparatus. And Israel, when it left Gaza 15, 20 years ago, did so with the very clear understanding for the Palestinian authorities that you're responsible for security here. And if attacks boil out of the Strip, we're going to treat it like you want to be treated, like a sovereign state, and that means action. And so you can make any number of arguments why that's not fair, because it's not like Israel has done what they can to support the civilian government, but that is their view. And so they are not simply going after everyone with a gun. They are going after everyone with a business card. And if they are successful, Hamas will not exist in any shape whatsoever. One of the things that people forget when they look at a place like Gaza with all those tunnels is that tunnels are really, really good when you control the surface. And when you don't control the surface, you are dealing with a wildly different environment where you don't know where the enemy is. And if the enemy happens to come across the generator that's providing you with air and light, then you die in the dark in a tunnel. So it is very difficult for me to see any form of Hamas surviving this. Not that that's going to solve the problem, because if Israel fails here, we know that in 5 to 10 years' time, Hamas will try again.
Yeah.
And if Israel succeeds here, well, then you still have 2.3 million people living in an open-air prison camp who are just mad and should be, and they're going to generate something similar, and we'll be back at this in 20 years. Yeah, the Monaco comparison is a lot of wishful thinking, unfortunately. I mean, Monaco is surrounded by some of the most advanced countries in the world that party there. Gaza is next to the useless part of Israel and the even more useless part of fair enough. As long as we're talking time machines, if I could go back and convince the Palestinians of something, I would go back to the days of Bill Clinton and get them to accept the Oslo Accords fully, even knowing that wouldn't give them everything that they wanted, because they're never going to get everything they want. They and Israel live in the same land. It's that simple. Yeah. You can have one country there, and then you can have one subsidiary. You can't have two countries. Everybody agrees where the border is. And that was what the Oslo Accords were about. And that was ultimately what the Palestinians rejected because they didn't feel they were getting enough. But as we've discovered since then, they could have had that, or they can have nothing. And so they have nothing.
Yeah.